Welcome to the Georgia Baptist Discipleship Podcast. I'm Scott Sullivan, Discipleship Catalyst. Our team exists to strengthen churches in the area of discipleship. We are developing 4 incredible opportunities to serve local church leaders. First, a brand new resource called Formed, a discipleship culture blueprint. This resource will be shared regionally to help local church leaders create a culture of multiplying disciples. Next, we'll be launching men's ministry cohorts. Our team plans to connect and equip men's ministry leaders across Georgia to reach, connect, and launch men to impact the world. Our team will also be running regional discipleship leader cohorts to equip and mobilize discipleship leaders in each region of the state. Finally, the Spark Conference. Spark is our total church equipping event for lay leaders. We trained over 4,100 people in 2025. All 6 locations are built for 2026, and I hope you will attend a Spark event in your region and bring your lay leaders. You can get more information on Spark dates, keynotes, breakouts, and locations by going to thesparkconference.com. Now, let's join today's discussion. Hey leaders, we've been introducing a new resource called Formed, a discipleship culture blueprint over the last 4 podcast. And today I've got on with me Robbie Norman, one of the hardest working, brightest leaders of any church anywhere. So Robbie, super glad to have you, buddy. Tell us a little bit about your role, what you're doing there at First Statesboro, and maybe a bit about your family.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I have been serving as Discipleship Pastor here at First Baptist Church Statesboro for a little over 4 years. Married to my awesome wife, Bethany, and we're coming up on our 24th anniversary this summer. And we have 4 amazing kids, 1 in college, 1 in high school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in elementary school. So that's where all the gray hair comes from.
Love it. Love it. What about the church? Tell us about your role.
Yeah, I serve as Discipleship Pastor, which is a new role that they created some 4 years ago after the church went through a 2-year revisioning process to where they kind of got aligned for where we're going as a church, which is to be a great commission and great commandment church. They realized they needed a pastor on staff that could help shepherd that cause. And so the Lord saw it fit for that to be me. And so what I do is I help make sure that all of our ministries, and we have a lot of ministries here, but all of our ministries are pointed towards achieving and fulfilling the Great Commission. So it looks different from kids ministry as it does from senior ministry and on and on and on. But it's just the role that is not focused on events, but actually making and multiplying disciples.
I love it. We have been following what you're doing. We've been engaged the whole time, learning from you, and hopefully it's been beneficial both ways. Now, we've been talking about this Formed, a discipleship culture blueprint, and you've been intimately involved in that, helping in the creation of it. We've been working through some trainings on that, and there's 4 main elements involved in that. The first, which was our first of these 4 episodes, was real relationships. And we shared how relationships are like adding rebar to concrete, right? It's holding it together, it ties, it strengthens the ministry together. And without it, the strategy that we have is going to fracture and crumble over time. It can look good, but it didn't have the strength, what we call tensile strength, like what rebar does in concrete. Now, the second element, we talked about disciple-making environments. And we were talking through different environments which Jesus made disciples and how it relates to the local church today. We learned about the more layers that we connect people into the local church, the greater opportunity for transformation and gospel impact. Then we jumped into the third element of the blueprint called transformational teaching or training. And we learned that transformation happens best when we live it out in relationship, but we're learning from Scripture through those accountable relationships. But transformation without multiplication leads to stagnation, right? So that's going to lead us into this 4th element that we're talking about today, which is intentional multiplication. Now, leaders, I want you to just really lean in right here, because here's a pivotal question that I'll just launch into as we talk about intentional multiplication. Are you measuring what matters most? And if you're not measuring anything, how do you know if you're winning? Like this thing that we're doing, right? And I want to introduce to you a question that really changed the game. Robbie, this is probably something you've been through similar, and it's this: which is more important, How many people are sitting or how many people are sending?
Mhm.
About
Yeah.
15 years ago, Robbie, I just began to really lean into that question. I guess as you mature as a believer, as a leader, you get to that point where you're like, okay, what am I going to do that's really going to make a difference? What are some of those rare areas in what we do personally and professionally that we can lean into that are going to leave a lasting legacy longer than my tenure there? Because here's the truth. Multiplication is not accidental, it's intentional, right? So that's the fourth element, which is intentional multiplication. Now, for mine and your purposes, when we're training through our regional cohorts, we talk about the concrete truck at this point when we talk about intentional multiplication. And why? Because the concrete truck, it's always moving, it's always mixing, it's always delivering. It doesn't sit still. Matter of fact, when it sits still, that's when the real problems happen for the
Mhm.
concrete truck. It doesn't store the material, it exists to pour out into something else. I mean, that's
Mhm.
just an incredible concept. And that's what discipleship is supposed to do, right? If discipleship isn't moving, it's stagnating and you're missing the mission.
Mhm.
For example, do you know why the Dead Sea's dead? It's not because it doesn't have fresh water flowing into it, because we know that there is part of the Jordan River that flows into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea's dead is because it stops moving. It doesn't have an outlet. And as I think about that illustration, that's where a lot of our Georgia Baptists or even churches across America find themselves is stagnating because maybe there's freshness coming in, maybe they have the ability to grow and move, but if their people aren't serving, if their people are engaged, then it becomes stagnant. So I've learned that
Mhm.
discipleship that doesn't multiply is discipleship that eventually dies. Now, let me give just four lanes right here where intentional multiplication must happen. Okay, this is part of our language, this booklet that we will be coming out with in the fall called Formed, the Discipleship Culture Blueprint. There's four pieces here. One is multiply people or multiply disciples, right? That's our target. And we like to say multiplication always begins one person at a time. Just like Jesus had his 12, he invested deeply into a few. Or you look at Paul. Paul invested into Timothy, right? Well, this true multiplication starts with personal investment in a few. And here's a question. Who are you personally investing in right now? So if you're a leader and you're listening to this or watching, if you're watching by YouTube, who are you personally investing in? Because you can't create a disciple making system or have a disciple making church if the leaders don't personally invest. So it's not teaching, it's not overseeing, it's discipling. Now, the second piece is multiply groups, right? So we have multiply disciples or people. The second was multiply groups because we must move from comfort to calling. And I've said for a decade now, Robbie, on podcasts, on interviews, that the greatest addiction in America, in my opinion, it's not drugs, it's not alcohol, it's not pornography, it's not even our phones that we fuss about all the time. How about that super cool camo background there, by the way?
That's pretty sweet.
In my opinion, the greatest addiction in America is comfort.
Mm.
Many of us are building these entire life, our entire systems, so that we can retire, so we can pull away from commitments, so that we can do less, so that we can slow down, so that we can be comfortable. Well, we must never lose sight of our calling to be a disciple who makes multiplying disciples. And I'm looking forward to retirement one day, but not retirement to slow down, but retirement to speed up so I can give
Mhm.
more to and more focus there. So let's talk about building gospel centered small groups, Sunday school classes, healthy groups here. They should gather with the intent to multiply. Okay, we talk about
Mhm.
that often. And I think about Acts 2 in that 46, 47, where they met house to house and the Lord added daily. But many groups today become what I call spiritual cul-de-sacs. They care
Mm.
well for one another, they study well, but they don't reproduce. Like when people come to our groups, they don't come to our groups to go anywhere. They come to our groups to just sit, sour, and soak, right? That's why I call it a spiritual cul-de-sac, because if you go to a cul-de-sac, you go, you park, and you're just there because you're not on the way to anywhere else. Well, our groups have to become places where people arrive and they move, where they arrive and they're engaged into further commitments and further ministry. But instead, people are arriving and they never leave our cul-de-sacs. because comfort replaced calling somewhere along the way. And if discipleship is happening, there should be a moment where the group says, we're not just here and we're not just going to stay, we're going to send. And that's where we want the language to begin. Now, this third piece, remember, you got multiplied disciples or people, multiplied groups. This third piece that we talk about is multiplying volunteers, from filling roles to raising leaders. You know, the old school concept here, Robbie, was that we would plug volunteer roles based on the need, right? Not based on where your passions were or based on where your spiritual giftedness was. It would just be based on need, which is a terrible way to do that, because you end up with people who hate children, working in children, and, you know, it just becomes this train wreck. So volunteers, it's important to see it this way. They're not just workers. They're future leaders and they're future disciple makers. And if we help them own the vision of the mission of the church, then that becomes to explode. Their life comes alive. And I think what I'm experiencing, what I've seen in 31 years local church, is that when we plug people in like that, they find things out about themselves that they love to do, in ways they love to serve that they didn't even know. We just had to give them the opportunity to do that. And the question shifts from who can do this to who are we developing to lead next, right? And I learned this the hard way. If you don't raise leaders, you will eventually lose momentum. And my goodness, it is so hard to regain momentum. Like when momentum's rolling and it's going, there's nothing better in the local church. But when you lose that, it is so hard. And many people find it impossible to regain that momentum. Well, here's the fourth of those 4 lanes that I was talking about. It's not just multiply people, multiply groups, and then multiply the volunteers. It's multiply churches or gospel ministries, moving from seeding to sending. Multiplication doesn't just stop at your building, because Jesus said in Acts 1:8, you will be my witnesses, and then goes on to say to the ends of the earth, right? So it's not just evangelism, it's expansion. It's growing, it's ever rippling out from where we are. But when churches see themselves as disciple-making, missionary, sending organizations, and that reverberates out across the globe, that's where genuine gospel impact globally begins to happen. And then we experience things like church planting, revitalization, partnerships. And a church that doesn't send, in my opinion, will eventually settle. So intentional multiplication, for me, Robbie, it's a mindset shift. Every disciple is a disciple maker. It's not just pastors. It's not just staff. Our team has said this 100 times. It's not about a program. And the program's not the plan. I am the plan. You are the plan. So leaders, I want you to lean in right here. I would love for you to help your volunteers, your church members, to understand that you can disciple your kids, that you can lead a group, that you can mentor someone, that you can fill a leadership gap in your church with teenagers. You can be a part of multiplying the mission. And that's why we say, Robbie, be one, make one, because that's who we are. And Robbie, honestly, the goal is not to build something that depends on us. The goal is to build something that outlives us. So jump in right here. Let's talk a little bit, a few questions that we have prepared, because I would love to get your thoughts on, because you're just one of the brightest minds. You're thinking through this, and not from just a cognitive standpoint, like you're having to figure it out because you're doing it every single day and you're having to problem solve this. So when we think about things like gospel and culture alignment, we talk about, things like hypocrisy and bearing fruit. Here's my question. How do you assess whether the gospel being preached and the culture that we're trying to create in a church is actually producing disciples who multiply rather than just attenders?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's one that every church probably wrestles with, or they should wrestle with, because it's one thing. I think every pastor worth his weight in the gospel will preach this, gospel, make and multiply disciples. But for a lot of churches, that's as far as it goes. And so what we have to do, number one, is not evaluate activity, like what are we doing, but evaluate fruit, like attendance and baptisms and the number of people who came to your Easter egg hunt or whatever. Measuring those matter, but those are just indicators. They're not the ultimate measure. But what we're wanting to is to measure fruit, because you can be busy as a church, but not be fruitful. So you've got to evaluate fruit. What are we producing? What are we making? And before I came on staff here at First Baptist Church Statesboro, that was the big question that they asked back in 2018 was, we have people, we're doing things, but what's the result? And so you've got to evaluate that. And you need some way to track not just participation, but spiritual reproduction. And that's not always with a number. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things to measure is someone's spiritual growth. Now you can see it, like when they make a decision to follow Jesus, or when they follow through with baptism, or when they pursue church membership, or they get involved in a group. Those are things you can see, but we're looking more at spiritual fruit, as far as, well, you can attend these things, but what's really happening in your life? So fruit is seen over time, not just checking off the boxes for events. And then,
so let's pause just there for a second, because you've piqued my interest, because I
okay,
know that First Statesboro, like you guys have a stated goal. You want to do things really well. If you're going to do it, let's do it well, and you figure out whether it's working. Okay. So let's take let's say you're walking into a staff meeting, typical Tuesday morning or whatever your staff meeting is, and you're there for a couple of hours, and you're going to assess that. What does it look like for, maybe it's a single staff pastor, maybe it's a pastor that has a couple of people on staff, whatever. What does it look like for you guys to talk about language of whether it's working? Do you have metrics? Is it about telling stories?
Yeah, we do have some metrics, like, who made a decision this week to follow Jesus, whether it was on Sunday during a service, or they reached out to us during the week, or we reached out to people as we're following up. Who made a decision, or hey, we celebrated a believer's baptism, or we celebrated, hey, we have started a brand new Sunday school class for young married couples. We celebrate those things. But we also celebrate the stories, like the victories of, like, what people are going through. Like we have a person that's coming through a membership process right now. He grew up in a non-church environment, experienced just a horrific life growing up and whatnot, but he found new life in Christ. And so those are stories we celebrate. So it's not just a transaction of, oh, someone's going through a membership process to become a member. We're hearing and we are seeing what God is doing in the life of this person. So we kind of take all of those things and put it into one basket. So it's not just numbers, like, how many people came to church this Sunday? Well, if you have a room that can only seat 120 and it fills up, you feel good about yourself. But then build a building that can triple the size of that number, and then you have 360 people in that, that a room that can seat 360, but you only have 120, and you start feeling bad about yourself again. So it's not about the room and filling it up. It's what is God doing in and through the lives of our people, and how can we multiply that out and keep that going? Like you said, momentum, because that builds momentum. When people hear of those other stories, and it's contagious, and people want this. And so no matter how much you might preach about it during a sermon, or it's written in your bulletin, or it's even on your website, sayings are great, but you've got to be doing it, and people have to be seeing it.
Yeah.
So that's what we do in a staff meeting. We say, what's God done? What's a story we can tell? Who is someone that you've encountered, or someone in a particular ministry in our church that you're seeing some fruit in their life. And and then we're discovering why we're seeing that fruit. Where's that connected? Are they involved in a Sunday school class, discipleship group? Do they have a one-on-one mentor type relationship? So we look for commonalities, and we make adjustments too. But that's how we
That's a good point,
assess.
Robbie, because if you could figure out where the Lord's working, it's still experiencing God deal, right? We'll figure out what God's
Right.
working and
Yeah.
join him.
And
So
join them.
if you
Yeah.
can figure that out in your church, whether it's maybe children's ministry, or maybe you're just saying, like, have you guys been paying attention what's happening in our men's ministry? Folks are being saved. Like, there are guys coming to church, haven't been to church in years, right? So if you see that, you see the fires beginning to kindle there, well, it allows you to feed the fire, right? But
Right.
if we don't ask those questions, and I'm telling you, Robbie, I need our listeners to hear this. This is not a large church concept. It's not a small church concept. This is simply having our ear to the ground and feeling the pulse
Yeah.
of where our people are. I mean,
Right.
a multi-vocational pastor can still have his finger on the pulse of the church, to understand, okay, where's God working, or where do we want him to work, or we're praying for stuff. Man, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts right here before we go talk more about some multiplication?
Well, with culture, how your question is, how do you assess whether the gospel being preached and the culture being created in the church are actually producing disciples? One thing that I thought of is assess the current culture of your church. Culture reveals what we value. Like, what are you celebrating publicly? Is it just your attendance number and your offering total in the bulletin? Or are you celebrating, like I said, stories of life transformation? Is that in front of people? Because I didn't make this up. I think Robbie Gallaty said this, and maybe somebody else. I don't know, but it's what you celebrate is what you replicate.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're putting out in front of people, and you're telling them, hey, this is what matters most. If it's an offering total, if it's an attendance number, if it's a metric that doesn't have to do with multiplication and fruit bearing, then people are subconsciously getting the wrong idea of, like, this is what we are about.
Yeah.
So if we just show up every Sunday and we fill seats, then we're winning, when that's totally not what we are supposed to be about as a church.
That's a great word. Now, when we talk about winning, Georgia Baptist baptized over 26,000 people last year. That's the largest total in 15 years, right?
Yeah.
I don't want us to be too excited, because that's not even keeping up with biological growth and the number of people who are moving into Georgia. So it's not like we're winning today, but it is an incredible statistic in terms of we're moving forward, right? Mm-hmm. So as we, of course, and you've heard this total as well, that we've seen millions of people baptized in the last 10 years with no measurable growth in attendance. So I want us to think about churches who are not seeing fruit, right, for the disciple making process, or they're not seeing the harvest. Their baptismal waters maybe aren't being stirred. I've served in that church before, and fortunately, things began to shift, and it got better from there. But I know the discouragement of going week after week, month after month, and not seeing salvation and not seeing a single person come forward right. So how do you help a church identify where that disciple making process is breaking down? Like, if they're in that boat, because there's one thing to just sit back and say, woe is me, but it's another thing to say, okay, if it's not doing what I'm praying for, like, what's my step forward? I got to be able to do something.
Yeah. Well, number one, because before I came to this role, I was a lead pastor, and it was a very, very small church when I started. And it was a long time before we saw salvation and a baptism. And so it can be easy to look around to other churches, either in your area or across the state or even across the nation, and get discouraged because you wonder, hey, God's doing this everywhere else. Why isn't he doing this here? But all of this takes time. But you do have to ask some pretty important questions. Number one, do you even have a disciple-making process? You could say, we want to make disciples and we want to, but what is it? Do you even have one? And then if you have one, make sure that it involves three things. Number one, that's biblical. You're doing it the way Jesus did it. Number two, it's scalable. It can grow with your church body, and it can grow into maturity. And then number three, it's reproducible. Like, this is going to be a machine that operates even long after you leave, because let's just be honest, we're all interim pastors. We're here for a period, whether we die and go home to be with the Lord, or the Lord moves us to another ministry assignment. He's got us where we're at. A small church, medium church, large church. He has us where we're at for a specific purpose and a plan. And you are the man for the moment. God has placed you there for a reason. And it's not going to be easy. But if you have a process, it's biblical, it's scalable, it's reproducible, you're on the right track. And then on the flip side of that, you should be living this process. You're eating it, you're drinking it, you're thinking about it. But do the people in your pews or in your chairs, do they understand the process? Are you communicating it to where it's clear and understandable to them? Because they're not going to jump on board, even if they see some gospel type activity happening. They're not going to jump on board if they don't understand what their role is in this, or what even this is all about. And then in your process, say you have a process and you're discerning that's just not working. Well, go back through and identify places where people are stopping, like they get so far through a discipleship and disciple making process where they stop, or people just drop out, and discover what can be done to encourage people to continue on and to remain, or to jump back on. Because we
Yeah.
all have, we have this utopia idea of disciple making, like, well, we're going to disciple, 20 people this year in our church, and it's going to be great, and no one's going to stop and no one's going to drop out. But the truth is you will have someone that will just say, this isn't for me anymore, or they're just going to disappear.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we don't push them aside. We just say, hey, we want to find ways to re-engage them. And it all has to do with some type of spiritual, maturity aspect. But those things, when you see it breaking down, you have to do a diagnosis and find out what's not working in your process. And then again, make it easily understandable for your people. They don't need 3 pages to define, what step one of your discipleship pathway is. They just need
All right. So let
something.
me insert a commercial right here, Robbie,
Yeah, yeah,
because you're one of the guys that, let's say we have, because typically when we do this, there'll be hundreds, if not thousands of people who watch these and they're taking notes and they're thinking through these concepts. In Georgia, there are 6 guys like you that are now on this Georgia Baptist discipleship team. They're not full-time on the team. You guys are full-time in your church, but you're serving on this
yeah,
team. And
yeah,
there are others as well. If a guy gets on there and he says, I need help assessing that, or I'm not sure what the next step. Man, I wish I could just have a conversation with somebody who's struggling with these same things. Let me just make a commercial here. That's why Georgia Baptist Discipleship Team exists, is to serve you guys, you ladies
hmm
that are doing this every single day. So if you've got questions, man, call us, shoot us an email. We'll connect you with a guy like Robbie or somebody else who's getting done.
yeah,
And they would love to be able to help move that forward. Any last thoughts on this point?
yeah. No, just you've got to figure out what's not working. And you said it earlier, Scott. This is not a program.
Yeah.
So don't rely on, you mentioned earlier experiencing God. That's a curriculum. And as great as it is, that is not like disciple making. That's just a study. So
The
we can
programs
help.
have to serve the purpose, right? They have to serve the mission. They
Exactly.
can't be the mission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like you said, we'd love to, I love local church. I'd love to help churches whenever and however I can.
Yeah. The reason that I brought this up, Robbie, is because I did a little statistic research over the last few weeks with Brian Nowak here in our office. And he shared with
Mhm.
me that there are 809 churches of our Georgia Baptists. So you got 3,400 churches. 809 of those baptize 0 or 1
Mm,
person. Okay.
mm.
Doesn't make them a bad church. You can be doing
Right.
everything right and still not baptize anybody or only baptize one. So I don't want you feeling badly, but I do know that a lot of those, because I served in that church, it can be
Yeah.
discouraging. And here's one of the greatest leadership principles that God's ever taught me: keep showing up.
Yeah.
Like there's points in my life when I didn't see the visible fruit that I'm praying for. I'm working 60, 70 hours a week. And I'm like, I've always felt like the more I work, the harder I work, the more fruit I ought to be able to see, right? And you're doing it and you're just not seeing the fruit, right? Well, God just taught me, you got to keep showing up, because he's working behind the scenes. He's working in the soil. He's working through those relationships. All right, let's go to the third one here. So in the
Okay.
introduction, I made the statement of transformation without multiplication
Mm.
leads to stagnation, right? I firmly believe that. Well, how do you evaluate whether a disciple making environment in the large group, the small group, the micro
Mhm.
group, how do we evaluate if it's producing intentional multiplication rather than just the stagnation? This is kind of
Yeah.
similar to where we were, but I want to unpack that a little
Yeah.
bit in the environments.
I think you have to discover who's actually discipling people. Um, like one of our stagnation things here at FBC Borough, and I mean, we're not perfect in everything we do. Good grief, we have a long way to
Yeah.
go too. Our Sunday school ministry is a stagnant ministry. I mean, we birth new classes, but we have some classes that have been a class for decades here, and they have not birthed a new class. They're coming, they're receiving great content, and they're just repeating that process from week to week. So that is stagnant. So when we implemented disciple making groups, which are separate, they're different from Sunday school. that is where people start discipling people, and then those people go to start discipling people. So what I do is I look for third generation disciple makers, meaning that, hey, I'm Robbie. I discipled a guy named Ben, and now Ben is discipling one of his employees. And then that employee is now discipling someone else in their life. So we're seeing, because I was intentional with Ben, he took it and ran with it, and he kept going. And so now we're seeing fruit as like a spiritual family tree. It's gone down the chain. So we're not just talking about an excellent Bible study. No, these are people who are investing into the lives of other people for their spiritual growth and multiplication. So someone who's discipled another, and this is when you know multiplication is taking place, instead of just gathering for a meeting once a week and studying the Bible and getting really some great content, but nothing happens with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good word. I was thinking about just a follow-up here, because there are going to be leaders that are looking and saying, okay, all that's good. And as I'm
Yeah.
listening to you talk, okay, I'm recognizing, things aren't really working well. But the truth is, I don't even have a plan. Like, if you
Yeah.
don't have a plan and you've never operated with any kind of strategy, you're not going to know how to develop that. So I want to mention two resources right here that are going to be really important for them. So we have a revitalization plan here at the board. It's called Refocus. It's through Rob Peters, and Corpus Vitae is the group. But our team's been trained on that. Dr. PJ Dunn, who was one of our discipleship consultants, and now he's overseeing that revitalization process. One of the most incredible leaders, one of the brightest minds. I'm telling you, the guy's getting it done. But if they want the full meal deal, and they're like vision, mission, strategy, how do I build out the core values? And then how does the whole thing fit together? This refocus process is the greatest tool that I've ever seen for that full meal
Mm.
deal. Like, just let us know. We
Yeah.
can get you into that. He's creating those pockets all over the state. Another
Yeah.
thing they're doing is what you and I are working on, and it's these regional cohorts, which could be a discipleship leader. Of course, most of our churches, the pastor is the discipleship leader. He is the men's leader. He's the women's
Mhm.
leader. He does it all, right? So these cohorts that are launching in April of 2026, and will just get bigger and more fleshed out as we move forward, is an incredible opportunity for people to come in, to work through, get an evaluation and assessment of where they are, and they can build a specific pathway to help start connecting all this energy and efforts they're doing, but try to create something that's going to live beyond them. And really, Robbie, we're
Right.
doing the same thing with men's ministry. We're going to create cohorts that are
Mhm.
coming out of, they're going to be in the fall of 2026, and they're going to be doing this really same concept, but it's through men's ministry, connecting men, discipling
Yeah.
men, multiplying men. So just wanted to mention
It's
those two
awesome.
things really quick. Now let's go to our
Yeah.
our last piece here, and it's really talking about multiplication pathways, right? Multiplying groups,
Mhm.
people, leaders, churches. So at FBC Borough, you all,
Yeah.
in this, my opinion, you do an amazing job of reaching new
Well,
people and then getting
thank
them
you.
in the door, right? I'm seeing it,
Yeah.
I'm watching, I'm like, man, that's a really cool idea. Creative, you're doing stuff in the downtown, you're out in the byways. For our leaders who are listening,
Mm.
share maybe at least one next step that we can take to make multiplication simple and visible and repeatable. Because,
Mm.
I'm just telling you, man,
Yeah.
the more complicated we make this thing, the more our leaders call and
Yeah.
there's like, hey, you know what you're saying? That sounds awesome. And you use a lot of big words, but it's too much, right?
Yeah.
So
It can
it's got
seem,
to be simple. Any ideas there?
yeah, it can seem overwhelming because, Scott, I've been in the role of the single pastor, only staff person, local church, and all of this can feel overwhelming
Yeah.
because you've got a sermon to prep for every week, maybe two, depending on your church structure. You've
Yeah.
got hospital visits, funerals, um, deacons meetings. I mean, you've got all these responsibilities, and then on top of this, you're like, well, we have this thing over me, like I've got to be doing the main thing, but how do I get there? One easy step is to find people in your church and to tell stories of multiplication where you can. Like, what's happening in your church? And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be this like huge fireworks in the sky type thing, but just share the stories, and then share them often. Um, if you can do something where you're recording a video, even via your phone and some microphone equipment that doesn't cost a lot, you can get some stuff on Amazon for cheap, and you could do it well, show it on a Sunday morning, put it on your social media of like, hey, this is what God's doing. This is how we're multiplying. Just get it out in front of people so that they can catch the vision. So it goes beyond you just speaking about it. They're seeing it in the lives of other people. And again, like I said earlier, man, it is so contagious. People are like, I
Yeah.
want in on this. And I've seen some of we talked about stagnation earlier, like church members who've been in a church for a long time. They attend worship, they go to Sunday school, but they're not really into the whole disciple making thing yet.
Yeah.
They begin to warm up to this, and then they get involved, and then they say they start lamenting like, why wasn't I doing this earlier or whatnot. Well, you can't change the past, just
Right.
work forward. And so tell those stories of multiplication everywhere that you can. And then another step for a lead pastor is you just have to start discipling somebody. It's
Mm.
going to be beyond your current scope of what you do. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's messy, but it's the most worthwhile thing you will ever do in your ministry. And if you're not doing it as a lead pastor, your church will not follow suit. And our lead pastor is discipling a group of men, so he's in the throes of it too. And when he started doing that, now our church is just like engulfed in this disciple making movement. I'm not saying that's the silver bullet, but that really motivates people in the
But I'm
right
telling
way.
you, I'm watching it, Robbie, because you're
Yeah,
talking it from the stage, you're training it through your groups, you're giving on ramps and off on ramps to get people in the door, but off ramps to get your people off the campus. So the
yeah,
whole thing that's why we call this thing disciple make it or a discipleship culture blueprint, because we got to create a
yeah.
culture where it's
Oh yeah,
expected and they're looking for the next thing and what's the next step in this process. I mean, here's my prayer. My prayer is that we will make it hard to go to hell from Georgia.
yeah,
That's my
yeah,
prayer, is that we'll create a
yeah.
culture in Georgia where our churches are thriving. People are excited. They're reaching their neighbors. They're talking Jesus at the restaurant and at the gas pump. And when that culture happens in a local church, and then it happens in an association and then a region and then throughout the state, then the
Mhm.
whole state is inflamed. And that's the vision of Georgia Baptist Mission Board that Thomas Hammond has given us. He said, I want to reach every man in every home in every county in Georgia. I want to give the
Mhm.
gospel to everyone. We can't make them trust Jesus, but we want to give them the opportunity. And that's my goal. Make it hard to get to hell from Georgia.
Yeah,
Any final thoughts
that's
there
great.
in terms of, maybe anything that you guys are doing to create culture at First
Yeah,
Borough?
well, it continues to morph. We had a gentleman visit our church, and we have an area where it's called Next Steps. After the service, you can go and really discover your next step uh, of what it is. And he just asked the question. He says, "When's your visitation program?"
Mm,
And that immediately triggered in my mind. He's talking about Tuesday night visitation,
yeah.
which had its season in a lot of
Hmm.
churches, and maybe there's churches that still do it, and it's still effective. And if so, that's awesome. But what I told him, I said, well, our visitation program is our members. Like where you live and where you work and where you play, that's your outreach. So outreach is not Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Outreach is 24/7. It's at the ball field, it's in your neighborhood, it's at your job, it's at Georgia Southern sports
Yeah.
events, all of that stuff. That's our outreach program. And most of the people who connect with us through salvation have done so through one of those types of relationships with people. Very rare is it that we just get a non-believer that just decides to show up to church just off the street, hear the gospel, and be born again. That is
Robbie, I want you to make a
extremely
note, dude.
rare.
You got to make a note
Yeah.
because we need to do a whole broadcast on that best practices of outreach. But what are churches doing? Because like
Yeah.
I'm hearing that there are churches going back to that visitation piece.
Hmm.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't know that would come back. Now I wouldn't, it's not a trend. When I say I'm hearing churches,
Yeah.
six to 10 out of 3,400, right? So it's not a trend, but there are people going back to that. But that in my last church, that's what we did. We were having 6 or 8 people would go on Tuesday nights, but then we moved it
Hmm.
back to the life group or Sunday school. and did visitation through that. And we were having hundreds of people do it through the Sunday school, but on their own time, not at a set time. And we saw
Right.
more people
Yeah.
baptized. Anyway, we need to do a whole broadcast on that. That would be incredible. So, man,
Yeah.
any final thoughts
That'd be
here
great.
as we close out, Robbie?
Well, if you know, sometimes people ask for what are a couple, like 2 or 3 things that you're doing at FBC Borough, and I always cringe because I don't want to say, well, this is what we do, and you need to do what we do, because you're not in Statesboro, Georgia, and let's be honest, what happens in Metro Atlanta and what might work up there is going to be way different from down here in rural Southeast Georgia. That's just different. But a couple things that have helped us to really drive that culture is our membership class. We hit this culture thing right out of the gate. We actually had a membership class this past Sunday, and we say, this is why we are here, to fulfill the Great Commission. And members, we want members to grow in their walk with Jesus and bring other people along to help them to do the same. That's what we are about. And that's what we expect of every member, to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. And then we train our people throughout the year. We have things internally that we do. I lead trainings. We have some of our disciple making team. These are just lay church members who have hung with us since we started discipleship groups, and now they're the main disciple leaders. We do trainings interior with them. And we look for things outside to go to as well, but you have to train your disciple makers. So, because they can go out there and do it, and they can do it badly, and we don't want them to do it badly. We want them to do it well. So I would encourage people to lean into things like that. Yeah. Highlight this in your new member process, and also train your people at least twice a year to get better at being a disciple and a disciple maker.
I would echo it. Home run. Robbie Norman, my good friend and trusted co-laborer, thanks for joining us today. And I'm going to remind all of you, our listeners, that we're only able to do this because you give to the cooperative program. So thanks for that. And I pray that today's discussion on intentional multiplication with Robbie Norman will equip you to think deeply, invest purposefully, and dream big as we make multiplying disciples. Thanks for joining us on the Georgia Baptist Discipleship Podcast. If today's episode encouraged you, would you take a moment to share it on your social media and leave a comment? That helps us serve more leaders across Georgia. If you'd like to stay connected on a deeper level, join our Georgia Baptist Discipleship Facebook group. Then message me or send an email so we can keep you in the loop on upcoming opportunities, resources, and training events. Thanks again for listening and for all you're doing to serve faithfully and make multiplying disciples.